Hello and welcome back to Better Know a Poet. Today we are doing F. Today, F is for Frost, Robert Frost. So we're learning about the great 20th century American poet, Robert Frost. Robert Frost was born in San Francisco in 1874. His father, William Prescott Frost Jr., was an ambitious journalist who attempted to make a name for himself in California writing. After his untimely death from tuberculosis in 1885, Frost's mother, Isabella Moody, moved with her two children to Lawrence, Massachusetts. There, Robert and his sister were raised by their paternal grandparents. Robert proved to be a dedicated student and graduated from his high school in 1892 as co valedictorian with Eleanor White, with whom he had fallen in love. After graduation, Robert matriculated to Dartmouth College, where, in 1894, he achieved his first professional publication in the pages of The Independent. Upon graduating from college, Robert and Eleanor, who had married in 1895, moved to Derry, New Hampshire. Here, Robert taught at Pinkerton Academy and raised poultry on a local farm. Poetry had long been Frost's vocational dream, but at nearly 40 years old, he had not published a single book and had placed only a handful of poems in a small number of magazines. In desperation, Frost made the decision to take his family to England, which seemed to be more open to new talent and experimental forms. The gamble paid off. Frost's first two poetry collections, A Boy's Will and North of Boston, were published 1 year after the other in 1913 and 1914. That same year, the Boston poet Amy Lowell found Frost's poetry in an English bookshop during a stay there and was so taken by his verses that she began a campaign to find him an American publisher. The publisher Henry Holt purchased Frost's American editions, and Lowell published a review of his work in the New Republic. The end result of all of these maneuvers was that when Frost returned to America the next year at the outbreak of World War I, he found himself famous, besieged by magazine editors clamoring to publish his poems. Frost's later life saw him as a poet and part time teacher at Amherst and the University of Michigan. For the next nearly 50 years, Frost saw his poetic star rise steadily and never dim. His poetry earned him the Pulitzer Prize on no less than four separate occasions. And in 1961, he was invited to read his poem, The Gift, outright for President John F. Kennedy's inauguration. By the latter half of the 20th century, Frost was acknowledged as the poetic voice of the nation. Despite the fact that Frost favored traditional forms over free verse, which he likened to playing tennis without a net, some of his best known works are in experimental free verse forms. These include After Apple Picking, Mending Wall, and Out, Out. Some criticize Frost for his attachment to traditional forms, and others for his evocation of a nostalgic rural past. But to many millions of others, Frost is the American poet, and the only modern poet worth reading. And speaking of traditional verse forms, today we're going to read probably one of his most well known traditional verses called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. See you tomorrow.